It's important to have these conferences, and we were talking earlier, not only just to learn what's out there, but actually for you to meet people and learn about best practices and what other people are doing. It's some of the most significant things we were doing. I spent a couple of years at the Department of Homeland Security, and I think one of the most significant things in some of these big grant programs were really just getting people together at the city, the county, and the state level to sign mutual aid agreements and work together and practice together and get to know each other. So it's so important, these things, beyond just sitting here and listening to people talk and talking heads, but also getting to know each other and learning what each of you are doing. I'm with the Office of Justice Programs. Some of you may or may not know what we do. We're the State and Local Assistance Division of the Department of Justice. So if there are grants, training programs, really that's all compiled into 5 bureaus and 2 program offices in the Office of Justice Programs. Very diverse. One Bureau of Justice Assistance, which is a major grant-making agency to state and local governments and law enforcement agencies. Juvenile Justice Delinquency Prevention, many of you are probably familiar with. Office for Victims of Crime. Bureau of Justice Statistics, my sister agency that does the statistical works. I currently have a somewhat dual hatting, but working with the National Institute of Justice, our research, development, and evaluation branch. You'll hear some of the studies that we're doing on school violence. The SMART Office, which was created by the Adam Walsh Act to coordinate all federal government policies as they relate to sex offenders. And the Weed and Seed Program, which you also may be familiar with, the Community Capacity Development Office. So these 5 bureaus and these 2 program offices really work together on preventing violence as a whole and crime in general, courts, prevention programs, corrections. But obviously, school safety and youth violence preventions are a major part of what all of those bureaus do. So what I'm going to try to do today is give you a sense overall what those bureaus do in several areas as they relate to school safety and youth violence. Mass tragedies, Virginia Tech, nickel mines, Cleveland last month, Finland. We continue to see these examples, high-profile examples of school violence. They're appalling. They're concerning. You don't even almost know how to react to them. But the interesting part is we have to put them in perspective as well. If you look at a lot of the statistics, we want to take them very seriously and work on them, and these conferences are important. But you also put them in perspective, because some of our statistics are showing that in some ways school violence is decreasing overall across the country. 2 years ago, an annual study by the Bureau of Justice Statistics, again our statistical agency in the Department of Education, found that violence in schools was its lowest level in a decade. Last year's study, the same study of serious violent crime in schools, said it continued to fall. But we're continuing to have these incidents, these high-profile incidents around the country. So all of us, and particularly you, are doing something right, but we're still missing a key part of what we need to be doing, and I think that's why we're here today, to determine what is that. But I still believe that school and at OJP that schools are the safest place for our children today, and we continue to need to work on that to make them even safer. Interesting part about these high-profile events, I mentioned Homeland Security, the part of them, and I watched the video earlier that said, you know, if people are in fear, they can't teach and they can't learn. And it's almost like terrorism in a way. You have these high-profile events, and they scare people to the point, which that's somewhat the purpose of terrorism, but they scare people so bad, they take a dimension well beyond their frequency that you'd see maybe in the statistics. So they're very important to deal with, and how do we work with them in a calm manner, in a professional manner, in a rational manner, so that we assure parents and children in the community that we're doing everything we can to help them. A few years ago, starting our research efforts, if we can talk about those a little bit, the National Institute of Justice, along with the Secret Service and the Department of Education, did a profile. We see these events occurring, so they profile school shooters and trying to assess a way of preventing future school shootings. We really wanted to get into to case studies and looking at them in depth. Two big conclusions from that first study on school shootings. One is you somewhat overturn the stereotype that these people react very suddenly, that it's not thought out, that they act impulsively, and we know that that's not true as we study these cases. These sometimes are very well thought out acts. They're in response to incidents or something that's wrong, but they don't include impulsively. There's a lot of planning involved. You see that in Virginia Tech and many of the other cases. They think these things out before they do them. Another thing we learned is how critically important it is to listen to our young people when trying to prevent these incidents. What we do know is not only do they plan these events, but these school shooters generally talk about these events to someone around them. Generally not adults, most likely their peers. And so this is where we see in 75% of the cases examined, the attacker had told someone about the plans before they were carried out. In one case, an attacker made comments to at least 24 friends and classmates about the plans. And again, these classmates aren't held responsible. They don't know they're serious. People say things, but we do know they communicate, and we have to be more keen on communicating what we're hearing. In Finland, the incident was found that they had actually discussed Columbine with a teenager in Philadelphia who had been somewhat thinking of planning an attack in his own high school. So we know they talk. We know they talk to their peers. And the major barrier is how do we get that information to the right person when these children hear this event or these youths hear this of these incidents? How do they get it to the right person? So communication is a big problem. After these events, we realized that in OJP that really privacy concerns are of real concern. If you look at Virginia Tech, the perpetrator had a long history of mental health problems throughout his childhood, moving forward. According to, actually, the reason I know some of this is we had the person who actually ran the Virginia Tech study come talk at our critical incident conference that National Institute of Justice does with the Department of Homeland Security and the Department of Defense. And he said, we knew this person had mental health problems, and throughout the problems, his parents were concerned he was going to go to a large school. They had worked with him throughout his childhood. They were concerned he wouldn't get the support he needed because it was such a large environment and somewhat intimidating. And then there were incidents at Virginia Tech. He wrote essays in classes that made kids afraid to go to school with him. Teachers were afraid to teach. They reported him. He was under supervision. But there was not a lot of communication among those different elements of the school knowing that this was happening. He bought guns. He got into the school. There were things that were happening that should not have happened to a person with these types of problems. And a lot of what we're finding, it's this concern over privacy rules. We have a great respect for privacy in this nation, which is admirable, and we should. But we've also got to know exactly what we can tell and we can't tell, because there are things you can do when you hear of these types of events. And so I know at Justice Programs and the Department of Justice, we're trying to work that out of how do we communicate what you can and cannot do when you hear. When this person's out talking to his peers and you hear something as a school administrator, as a teacher, what can you share and not share? Because that fear a lot of times stops people from sharing information and getting and preventing these types of incidents.